the thunder that sleeps within. The earth trembled beneath 10,000 hooves as the enemy cavalry charged across the crimson battlefield of Kalinga. Arrows whistled through the smoke-choked air like deadly hornets, and the clash of bronze against bronze rang out like the anvils of the gods themselves. The heart of this chaos, where death danced with glory, stood a mountain of gray flesh and indomitable will, Gajaraj, the Thunder Walker, mightiest of all war elephants in the realm of Magadha. His tusks, bound with rings of gold and sharpened to deadly points, gleamed crimson in the dying light. Upon his broad back sat his mahout, Devendra, whose battle cries pierced the din of war like lightning splitting the monsoon sky. But it was not the rider who struck fear into enemy hearts, it was the beast himself, whose very presence on the battlefield could turn the tide of empires. "Charge, my brother!" Devendra's voice cracked with fierce joy as he felt the familiar tremor of power beneath him. "Show them why kings tremble at your name." Gajaraj's trumpet call shattered the air, a sound that was less animal cry than force of nature, the voice of mountains moving. His massive legs, each thick as ancient tree trunks, drove forward with earth-shaking force. Enemy soldiers scattered like leaves before a hurricane, their spears snapping like twigs against his armored hide. Where other war elephants might hesitate or falter, Gajaraj was pure, unstoppable momentum, a living siege engine that knew neither fear nor defeat. The enemy's war chariots wheeled desperately to avoid his charge, but Gajaraj moved with the terrible grace of an avalanche. His trunk swept aside a dozen warriors as if they were mere children, while his tusks pierced through bronze shields as though they were made of parchment. In that moment, as victory crystallized around him like dew at dawn, he was not merely an animal, he was the living embodiment of his kingdom's might, the thunder made flesh. But that was 20 seasons ago. Now, in the 17th year of peace, Gajaraj moved through the royal gardens with the gentle dignity of a retired sage. His tusks, no longer bound with golden rings, had been carefully trimmed and smoothed. Where once scars from 100 battles had marked his hide like medals of honor, now lotus garlands draped across his shoulders, placed there each morning by the palace children who had never known the terror of war. King Chandragupta walked beside him, no longer the young warrior who had once ridden into battle atop other steeds while Gajaraj carved paths through enemy lines. King's hair had silvered, his face lined with the wisdom of years spent building peace rather than waging war. His hand rested affectionately on Gajaraj's massive flank as they strolled through groves of sandalwood and jasmine. "Do you ever miss it, old friend?" the king asked softly, his voice carrying the weight of shared memories. The thunder of battle, the glory of victory? Gajaraj's ancient eyes, deep pools of amber wisdom, turned toward his beloved king. In them was no trace of the fierce fire that once burned there, only contentment, the peaceful satisfaction of a warrior who had earned his rest. He rumbled low in his throat, a sound of pure tranquility, and gently touched the king's shoulder with his trunk. King smiled, understanding the gesture as clearly as spoken words. "Yes, I know. We both have found our peace, haven't we? The kingdom prospers, our people sleep safely, and we have earned the right to enjoy these quiet moments." They continued their evening walk, as had become their cherished ritual. Palace gardeners bowed respectfully as they passed, and children peeked around corners to catch glimpses of the legendary elephant who had become as gentle as a temple priest. Birds nested fearlessly in the folds of his ears, and butterflies danced around his head, landing on his trunk without a trace of fear. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of saffron and rose, they approached the edge of the royal grounds where the cultivated gardens gave way to the wild forest beyond. It was here, in this threshold between civilization and the untamed world, that Chandragupta often came to think and remember. The envoy from the northern kingdoms arrives tomorrow, the king mused, watching the first stars appear in the deepening sky. They come seeking alliance, not conquest. Can you imagine, Gajaraj? Once they would have come with armies. Now they come with gifts and treaties. The elephant's trunk swayed gently as he listened, his massive head nodding almost imperceptibly. He understood more than most humans realized, not just the words but the deeper currents of meaning beneath them. He had been present at the forging of this peace, had stood silent witness as his king transformed from conqueror to builder, from destroyer to creator. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the wild scents of the forest, earth and growing things, the musk of distant animals, the promise of night-blooming flowers. Something in those scents stirred a memory so faint it was like the echo of an echo, but Gajaraj could not quite grasp it. His great ears flapped lazily and he took a step toward the forest's edge. Careful, my friend, the king cautioned gently. The forest floor can be treacherous in the dim light. Even for one as sure-footed as you. But Gajaraj was already moving, drawn by some half-remembered impulse. His feet, which had once navigated the chaos of battlefields with perfect precision, stepped confidently onto what appeared to be solid ground covered with fallen leaves and moss. For a moment all seemed well. Then the earth betrayed him. What had looked like firm forest floor was instead the deceptive surface of an ancient quicksand pit, hidden beneath seasons of accumulated debris. The ground gave way like a cruel illusion, and Gajaraj felt the terrible sensation of the world disappearing beneath his feet. His first reaction was not panic but confusion. This was outside his experience. In battle, he had faced charging cavalry, spear walls, and the fury of enemy elephants, but never had the earth itself turned traitor. He tried to lift his foot, but the sand gripped him like hungry mouths. With each movement, he sank deeper. Gajaraj! King's cry split the evening air like a blade. Guards! Keepers! Come quickly! The elephant's massive body, which had once been his greatest weapon, now became his curse. His weight, the very thing that had made him unstoppable in battle, drove him deeper into the pit's embrace. The sand reached his belly, then his chest, with each passing moment pulling him further into its cold, suffocating grip. For the first time in his long life, Gajaraj felt truly helpless. Within minutes, the royal gardens swarmed with activity. Palace guards came running with torches, their flames dancing wildly in the gathering darkness. The elephant keepers arrived breathless, their faces pale with horror at seeing their beloved charge trapped in the earth's mouth. Behind them came ministers, advisors, and servants, all drawn by the commotion and the king's anguished cries. Ropes! Commanded Mahout Devendra, now gray-haired but still bearing the erect posture of a warrior. Bring the strongest ropes we have, and summon every elephant in the royal stables. The rescue effort began with the desperate efficiency of trained minds facing an unthinkable crisis. Thick ropes, strong enough to moor ships, were brought from the palace stores. Teams of servants and guards worked to secure them around Gajaraj's massive body while he stood as still as possible, understanding instinctively that movement would only hasten his descent. The first attempt involved 30 men hauling on the ropes in unison. Their muscles strained, their faces reddened with effort, and the very air seemed to vibrate with their collective will. But the quicksand held fast, and Gajaraj sank another hand's breadth deeper. "Bring the elephants," the king commanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "If human strength is not enough, then we must try with our mightiest beasts." 10 royal elephants were brought from their quarters, their mahouts urging them forward despite their obvious reluctance to approach the treacherous pit. They were magnificent creatures, each one worthy of a king's stable, but beside Gajaraj they seemed almost small. The mahouts arranged them in a line and secured the rescue ropes to their harnesses. "Now," shouted Devendra, "pull together." The sight was both magnificent and heartbreaking. 10 elephants straining as one, their massive bodies leaning into the effort, their trunks raised high as they trumpeted with exertion. The ropes went taut as bowstrings, groaning under the tremendous force. For a moment it seemed as though Gajaraj might rise from his earthen prison. But the quicksand was older than kingdoms, patient as death itself. The ropes stretched but did not yield their prize. Instead, with a sound like a sigh from the depths of the earth, Gajaraj sank deeper still. King Chandragupta fell to his knees at the pit's edge, his royal composure finally cracking like a dam under impossible pressure. "My friend," he whispered, his voice broken. "My oldest, dearest friend. I cannot lose you. Not like this." The elephant's eyes met his king's across the diminishing distance. In them was no accusation, no fear, only a deep, abiding love and a terrible acceptance. Gajaraj had faced death many times in battle, but always as a warrior, fighting to his last breath. This slow surrender to the earth felt like a betrayal of everything he had ever been. Hours passed. Torches burned lower, replaced by fresh ones as the rescue efforts continued. Engineers arrived with pulleys and levers, attempting to apply mechanical advantage to the problem. Priests came offering prayers and blessings. Physicians came with oils and potions, though what good these could do against quicksand none could say. With each failed attempt, Gajaraj sank lower. The sand now reached his shoulders, and his breathing had become labored as the weight pressed against his massive chest. Still he did not struggle or panic, maintaining the dignified composure that had marked him throughout his life. But in his deep amber eyes, the king could see a growing resignation, the look of a great soul preparing to depart. As the night deepened and hope began to fade like dying embers, a new figure emerged from the forest shadows. He was a sage, bent with age but moving with the quiet grace of one who had found perfect balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. His simple robes were the color of sunset, and his eyes held the depth of ancient wells. Crowd parted respectfully as he approached the pit. He studied the scene in silence, the exhausted rescue teams, the weeping king, the trapped elephant whose massive form was now more than half swallowed by the earth. Your Majesty, the sage said softly, his voice carrying clearly despite its gentle volume. May an old wanderer offer counsel? King looked up, hope flickering in his eyes like a candle flame guttering in the wind. Wise one, we have tried everything, strength, numbers, engineering, prayers. Nothing avails against this cursed earth. The sage nodded slowly, his gaze fixed not on the quicksand or the ropes but on Gajaraj himself. I see a great warrior, he said thoughtfully. One who has known victory and glory, who has felt the thunder of battle in his very bones. But I also see one who has forgotten the song that once made him mighty. Confused murmurs arose from the crowd. What could this old man mean? What good were riddles when their beloved elephant was dying before their eyes? But the sage was already moving, his aged hands gesturing to the palace guards. Bring me war drums, he commanded with sudden authority. The great battle drums from the royal armory. And bring the victory horns, the same that once announced your conquests. What? King stared at him in bewilderment. How can music help when physical force has failed? The sage smiled, an expression of infinite compassion mixed with deep wisdom. Your Majesty, you have tried to save the body, but you have forgotten the spirit. This elephant's muscles may have grown soft with peace, but his warrior's heart still beats within him. Sometimes to save the man you must first awaken the hero. Skeptical but desperate, the king gave the orders. From the royal armory came the great war drums, each one tall as a man and bound with bronze. Behind them came the brass battle horns, their long tubes gleaming in the torchlight. The musicians who had not played these instruments in years took their positions with trembling hands. Now, the sage said quietly, positioning himself where Gajaraj could see him clearly. Play the songs of victory. Play the music that once shook the earth when this mighty warrior walked upon it. The first drum beat was soft, almost tentative, a single deep note that rolled across the garden like distant thunder. The sound, Gajaraj's great ears twitched, and his eyes showed the first spark of something other than resignation. The sage raised his hand. Louder. Let him hear not just the sound but the memory. Let him feel again the power that sleeps within. The drumbeat grew stronger, joined by a second drum, then a third. The rhythm was ancient, primal, the heartbeat of armies, the pulse of empire. As the sound built, the brass horns joined in, their voices rising like the calls of angels announcing the dawn of battle. And in Gajaraj's eyes, something extraordinary began to happen. The gentle, peaceful contentment was burning away like morning mist before the sun. Deeper currents were stirring, ancient powers long dormant but never truly dead. His nostrils flared as the battle music washed over him, and for the first time in hours, he raised his massive head high. The drums beat faster now, their rhythm matching the gallop of war horses, the charge of infantry, the very pulse of conquest itself. The horns sang with the voices of 1,000 victories, and each note seemed to strike sparks from the elephant's awakening soul. Yes, the sage whispered, his eyes bright with wonder at the transformation he was witnessing. Remember, Great One. Remember who you were. Remember the thunder that walks in your bones, the lightning that flows in your blood. You are not a victim to be rescued. You are a warrior who has never known defeat. The music reached a crescendo, and Gajaraj's trunk rose high into the night air. The sound that emerged from his throat was not the gentle rumble of a pampered palace pet, but the war cry of legend, a trumpet call that had once frozen enemy armies in their tracks and given courage to his own warriors. But it was what happened next that would be spoken of in whispers for generations to come. Instead of waiting passively for rescue, instead of depending on ropes and other elephants to pull him free, Gajaraj gathered his massive legs beneath him. Quicksand that had held him fast suddenly encountered not the dead weight of a trapped animal, but the focused power of a warrior who had remembered his true nature. His muscles, soft from years of peaceful retirement, found their steel once more. The warrior's spirit that had been sleeping within him blazed to full life, and with it came not just courage but the terrible, magnificent strength that had once made him a force of nature upon the battlefield. With a sound like the earth itself splitting, Gajaraj heaved himself upward. Quicksand, which had seemed so immobile, so irresistibly hungry, found itself fighting not gravity and dead weight, but the pure, focused will of a legend reborn. Step by tremendous step, he climbed from his prison, each movement accompanied by trumpet calls that shook leaves from the trees. Crowd watched in stunned silence as the great elephant emerged completely from the pit, his hide caked with sand but his bearing transformed utterly. He stood on solid ground once more, but he was no longer the gentle, peaceful creature who had entered the forest. The fire of his youth blazed in his eyes, and every line of his body spoke of power barely contained. For a long moment he stood there, the war music still thundering around him, looking for all the world like the living embodiment of conquest itself. The years fell away from him like discarded armor, and those who watched could see him as he truly was, not a retired pet but a titan who had shaped the destiny of nations. Then, as the music gradually faded, the fire in his eyes softened once more. But it did not die, it transformed, becoming not the cold embers of retirement, but the warm glow of a strength now consciously possessed rather than forgotten. He looked at his king, at the sage, at all the people who had worked so desperately to save him, and his trunk curved in what could only be described as a smile. King Chandragupta approached slowly, his face wet with tears of relief and wonder. "My friend," he whispered, placing his hand on Gajaraj's massive side. "I thought I had lost you." The elephant's response was gentle but unmistakable. He wrapped his trunk around the king's shoulders in an embrace that spoke of bonds deeper than words, deeper than time itself. But in that embrace, Chandragupta could feel something new, or perhaps something very old that had been recovered. This was not just the affection of a tame elephant for his keeper, but the loyalty of a warrior for his king, freely given and consciously chosen. The sage approached them both, his ancient face glowing with quiet satisfaction. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "you have given this noble creature the gift of peace, and that was well done. But tonight you have given him something even more precious, the knowledge that his strength was never truly gone, only sleeping." As the crowd began to disperse and the torches were extinguished, the three of them stood together in the starlight, king, elephant, and sage. quicksand pit lay empty behind them, already beginning to fill with water seeping up from below, as if the earth itself were washing away the memory of its temporary victory. "Will you stay and accept our hospitality, wise one?" the king asked the sage. "We are in your debt beyond measure." The old man shook his head gently. "My path lies elsewhere, your majesty. But remember this night, both of you. Sometimes the greatest strength lies not in what we can do, but in remembering what we have always been capable of doing. Tiger does not lose his stripes when he sleeps, nor does the warrior lose his courage when he rests." With that, he melted back into the forest shadows as quietly as he had appeared, leaving behind only the memory of wisdom and the echo of profound truth. King Chandragupta and Gajaraj walked slowly back toward the palace, but their relationship had been forever changed by the events of the night. The king still loved his old friend with the same deep affection, but now that love was tempered with a renewed respect for the magnificent creature who walked beside him. And Gajaraj, for his part, moved with a new awareness of himself, peaceful still but no longer merely passive. In the days that followed, the palace children still brought him lotus garlands, and he accepted them with the same gentle grace. But sometimes, when the wind was right and carried the distant sound of marching feet or the calls of wild elephants, his great ears would perk up and his eyes would gleam with an inner fire that reminded everyone who saw it that legends never truly die, they only wait for the right moment to awaken once more. The moral of the story: within each of us lies a power greater than we often remember, not the strength of our bodies alone but the indomitable force of our spirit when truly awakened. Like Gajaraj, we may find ourselves trapped by circumstances that seem insurmountable, but our greatest victories come not from external rescue but from remembering and reclaiming the warrior within. The thunder of our potential never truly sleeps. It only waits for the right moment, the right inspiration, to remind us of who we truly are and what we are capable of becoming.